All right, tonight what I want to do is I want to talk about the general geography of Palestine. And I think the easiest way to think about this land is it's divided it up into regions, and they all go like this. All right, so first one is easy. This big blue thing here, the Mediterranean Sea, right? And then you've got this area here, it's called the coastal plain. Then you've got the hill country through here. You've got the big Jordan Valley through here. And then you've got the Transjordan Plateau up here. And as you can probably imagine, the land starts off low, it comes up high, it goes down to a deep valley, and it comes back up again. That's kind of the way it looks. So we'll talk about the Mediterranean Sea first. The Mediterranean Sea, when you read the Bible about the sea, especially in the Old Testament, you read about the sea, it's always talking about that. It's the only sea they knew of. Mediterranean, it means middle of the earth. The Romans named it that. And if you don't know anything about the Romans, you would understand that anywhere where the Romans lived, if there was a sea there, it was the middle of the earth because the Romans were right there, right? They thought pretty high of themselves. So that's where that name comes from. And as we look at the coast of this land, we'll go ahead and start up at the top. We have these two towns up here in this area called Phoenicia, and it's Tyre and Sidon. Now these were really good ports. So these were natural sea harbors that were there. And those Phoenician people, they were known as seafaring people. And they kind of got forced into that in a way, because if you look at their land, this is a topographical map, right? So this map, when you see green, that doesn't mean it's necessarily a grassland. It just means it's a low spot. And you see brown, that doesn't mean it doesn't have grass, it just means it's a big mountain, right? So up here, this area here, I know it's green, but it's not. I think my next map, yeah, that doesn't really show it very well. So there wasn't a lot of farming opportunities is what I'm getting at. So because they didn't have a lot of those opportunities, they turned towards the sea. And of course, the Phoenicians had a huge influence on the ancient world. And if you think about it, if you had a couple of towns and the people from that town were traveling all over the place, well, whatever they did would spread, right? They would kind of spread different cultural things throughout the world. So that was those two towns. And then if you come down here, you see this. I always think about this. Looks like a boot, like the heel of a boot sticking out. That's Mount Carmel. The Phoenicians kind of they ruled this area through here, and in this kind of area the Jews and them fought over a lot of times. That one area through there. But you got Mount Carmel right there, so that kind of sticks out there. Well, I always think about Elijah and Elisha. They kind of hung around that area. So that's kind of what's going on through there. And then we go down here. Now after this point, there's no good seaports in the whole land. There's no good place to park a boat. It was too shallow. Now during fair weather, certain times of the year, at Dor and Joppa, you could park a boat out in the ocean and go and take a little boat in. But for the most part, there wasn't any sort of natural harbor where you could bring a big ship in. Remember, wasn't there a famous guy in the Old Testament that sailed out of Joppa? Right. He went fishing, right? Jonah. So then there's this thing, Caesarea. Now in the Bible, we read a lot of times about Paul sailing out of there. And the reason that was possible is King Herod made an artificial harbor there Caesarea. Actually, there was a town there before. It was called Strato's Tower. And Herod kind of took it over and he renamed it Caesarea because he maybe was trying to impress somebody. Right? Who do you think he was trying to impress?
Caesar.
The Caesar, right? Because that's where that comes from. So there's Caesarea, and that became a busy harbor, certainly in the time of Christ, and in our New Testament times, we see Paul sailing out of there pretty regular. We come down here to Joppa. I'm not really sure how you're supposed to say that. I've been corrected, but I can't remember which way they corrected me. So I guess it didn't work. That was a capital city of the Philistines. We see Gaza, same thing, was a Philistine city. So that's kind of the coastline. Then we move in to this coastal plain, and there's different areas of it. I'm not sure where my notes start at. I haven't looked at my notes yet, so. Okay, so when we look at this, it kind of varies in width. You can see, down here, I believe it's about, 15, 20 miles wide down here. But you get up in here and it's only, 6, 8 miles wide. So it varies in width, the coastal plain. Now this area is a very fertile area. Lots of good land for growing. There were lots of natural springs that just came up out of the ground over there. In some areas, there were alligators in this area. It's amazing when you start studying the things that were in this little piece of land. It's amazing. All sorts of different animals. Some of them exotic. All different sorts of weather. Any kind of weather you could think of, they had in this area. So you have these different plains. The first one's this plain of the Philistines, or plain of Philistia. Now the Philistines, not 100% sure where they came from. If we were to look in, let me see, I got a note on it here somewhere. The Philistines, in Genesis 10:14, it says, the Casluhites, from whom the Philistines came. So Philistines came from some group of people called the Casluhites. Don't really know a whole lot about them. When they were doing some archaeology over in Egypt, they found an inscription there that those people were paying tribute to Egypt. So there's a couple of different sources that talk about them. A lot of people think they were probably from Crete, which was an island. And I guess a lot of historians say that there was some sort of political upheaval in that area, and a group of those people went out to the sea, and this is where they landed at, and of course they started a settlement there. Of course, we know our Old Testament. Israel was always having problems with the Philistines until David finally pretty much subdued them. Let me see here. So we've got our 3 sections of the coastal plain. Right? We've got this plain of Philistia, we've got this plain of Sharon, and we've got the plain of Phoenicia up there. And we kind of already talked about Phoenicia a little bit. But all of these areas were very fertile, and sometimes the Israelites controlled these areas. A lot of times they didn't. Now there's a big road through here. See that? There's this road called the Way of the Sea, and this goes all the way to Egypt. And this was one of the major trade routes. And it connected basically the area of Damascus, of Mesopotamia, that whole area, to Egypt. And it was you think about something going along the sea, it's a nice easy road to walk on. That wasn't true of some of these other roads. But this road was a nice road. And it went through this area. I don't know, you see it? See, there's a brown thing there and a brown thing there? Those are mountains. There's a mountain pass that this road goes through. And I'm telling you, whoever controlled that road. Right? So if you were bringing some goods or marching an army through there, whoever controlled Megiddo, this area, that group of people controlled what went on that road. And there was a lot of money being made by controlling that. And the Jews typically controlled that. That was in their area. So that was an important part of that. What else do we have here? We'll talk about the Shephelah. I bet you never use that word. Right? That's up here. So you come up the plain and you've got this area called the Shephelah. And it's kind of like, you know how a mountain comes down and then there's like some rolling hills, kind of like Ohio at the bottom of the mountain? You think about us, you know, we're at the end of the Appalachian Mountains where we're at. I believe the Appalachian Mountains technically stop in Holmes County, Ohio. And so, you know, you think about Ohio has all these rolling hills. Yeah, that's kind of the way I think about this Shephelah. Of course, it's not nearly as big. It's a lot smaller area. But that is the area where David fought Goliath, was in the Shephelah, and these hills here. You think about, you know, here's the Philistines here, right? And here's the Jews here, Judea. Well, that's a natural place where you'd fight him. You know, that's where you know, they were coming head to head. The Bible talks about the boundaries of the Promised Land, and it says the southernmost boundary was the river of Egypt. That is not the Nile River. Right? So when we think about Egypt, the river in Egypt, that's usually what I think about. It's the Nile River, the biggest river in the entire world. That's not what it's talking about. This river of Egypt is what they call a wadi. For 3 points, can anybody tell me what a wadi is?
A seasonal.
What is it?
A seasonal river.
Yes, absolutely. 3 points. I'll write that down. Yeah, so it's like a dry riverbed. Most of the year it's dry, but when it gets a lot of rain, it can be, you know, something to deal with. So that's what this river of Egypt was. It was a wadi. There are several of those, and if you have like I believe the New International Version uses that term several times, and Matt could probably tell you other versions that might use it, but that's the one I've noticed. So it went from there all the way up to the Euphrates over here. Now, when the conquest of Canaan happened, they never took control of this. All this land that God promised them, they never really took control of it. But as we read throughout the Bible story, we find that King David basically subdued all of these people through here. And him and his son Solomon basically did control all the promised land. Even though maybe they didn't inhabit all of it, at one time they did control all of it. Let's see here. So that kind of brings us to, here's one I can't read my notes. It kind of brings us to the hill country. That's this area here. When we think about, you know, Jerusalem and all of those places, that's on the hill. That's this hill country. And this hill country starts way up here. There's the Lebanon Mountains. I think if you're like Rick might say Lebanon. How do they say that down south?
Oh, I usually just say Lebanon.
Lebanon? I had a guy from Tennessee correct me. He said we pronounce that Lebanon. I said, oh, well, each to his own, I guess, right? So that mountain range starts up here, the Lebanon mountain range, and then it kind of splits through here. And it becomes two different mountain ranges. And this one that goes through here is still called the Lebanon mountain range. Any idea what this one's called? The anti-Lebanon mountain range. How original. But that's what this range over here is called. And throughout this hill country, this was really the Israelite stronghold. It's hard to get somebody off a hill, right? Once you've gained the high ground, it's really hard to get somebody out of that position. And I think that's why they kind of went there first. There are several smaller mountains in here. You have Mount Tabor, so Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, those are twin mountains. And right in between them is Shechem. You remember that? That's where I want to say that was where they set up they renewed the covenant with Joshua, I believe, in Shechem, if I'm remembering that right. It's that stretch of road's about 50 miles long. There's a huge drop on this side of it. And this area actually receives quite a bit of water. It gets good rain. Because what happens is you've got winds that are blowing across the ocean. And it's kind of warm. And then it hits a hill country. And what happens to the temperature when you go up on a hill? Temperature goes down, right? So all this weather comes through here, and it hits this area, and it cools that water down, the clouds down, and then that makes it rain. So they get good rain through here, especially in the wintertime, which is basically their main growing season. So it's even though it looks brown here, it's a pretty fertile area through there. And then through here, there's this other road called the Way of Shur. Now, I don't know if any guys ever lived on like a side road. You know, if you live on a side road, the only people really has got business of being on that side road is you and the mailman, because it doesn't go anywhere. And to a point, that's kind of the way this Way of Shur was. It was a hilly, rough road, and unless you were going into, Hebron, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, any of these different, all these stronghold cities, there's easier ways to travel north. Like way easier to go on the Way of the Sea or the King's Highway over here. Those are nice flat roads, but you wouldn't go up this. So this road was mainly only used by the Jews, or primarily used by the Jews. If you think about, I'm trying to think about Ishmael's mother. What was her name? Hagar. I think Hagar, because all of those problems, so Abraham's living there in Beersheba, and remember, Hagar was pregnant, and Sarah just had enough of her and told her to leave. And I believe this is where she went, down the Way of Shur. She was heading back to Egypt because she most likely was from that area somewhere. But there, the Way of Shur, that's that road. So, and then we got this area here called the Negeb. And that's kind of a dry area through there, more desert. Now, certain times of year when it rains, it does pretty well, and they can grow stuff through there, but not a ton of stuff. So now that brings us to the Jordan River Valley, and I've got to open up my phone for my notes on that because I failed to print them off, but I've got them right here. And the Jordan River Valley is part of something called the Great Rift Valley. And it goes from here to Africa. It's a big, long valley. It goes for 4,000 miles. Very, very long. And in the middle of this thing is a river called the Jordan River. And when I look at a map of the Promised Land, the first thing I look for is this thing. What is that? The Dead Sea, because that's a thing you can look at, and if you know where that's at, well, you know where everything else is at, right? Be like if you looked at a map of Ohio and saw Columbus, right? It's right in the middle. You kind of gauge how far something is away from Columbus, just because you know where it's a central thing. So we're going to start up here. So you've got the Jordan River that comes up here, and it starts in a spring. I believe it's one of the biggest freshwater springs in the world. Just water just pours out of the ground, and that's what feeds this river. And a lot of times we think about, why didn't they use this river to travel on? Well, they couldn't. This river was not a river. This area in here, it's so steep, you couldn't whitewater raft it if you wanted to. It drops like 600 feet in a very short distance. It's a very, very rugged river, and it doubles back on itself. It doesn't show it on the map, but it just twists and turns, and it's not really a good way to move materials. In fact, you read about when they were building the temple and David's house, and they've got those cedars of Lebanon. Well, those are up here. I always thought, well, why didn't they just take them and put them in the river and float them down? Why did they take them all the way over all this rough land and put them in the sea and bring them down? Well, because from here to here is a 2,000-foot drop. You couldn't take a big, huge log and take it down there. And then when you got it to the bottom, what are you going to do with it? You're got this rocky, rough river. You couldn't use that. So as we come down here, there's this thing called Lake Hula. That's no longer there. In the 1950s, they drained that to try to combat malaria. At one time, though, it was like a marshland. The Bible talks about lions being there. So, remember the story about the prophet who was eaten by a lion? It was in that area. We come down here to the Sea of Galilee. Pretty good sized piece of water. It's the lowest freshwater lake in the world. There's still a fishing industry there. And we think about, the disciples, they were fishermen, so that's where they were working at all the time. And all around this is just, if we had pictures of it, you would say that's Ireland. Rolling green, beautiful hills. Doesn't look like anything what you would imagine. It's not when I think of this area, it's not what I thought of. Beautiful, just a beautiful area. All kinds of agriculture. And Jesus grew up right there. Right? So he grew up right on this ridge. If this was West Virginia, that's what we might call that. Really. So he grew up in there. This thing it's called the Esdraelon, and it's also called Jezreel. One's Hebrew and one is Greek, but they mean the same thing. It's a big valley that goes through here, and it's very well watered. And you think about, that rain coming up on the mountains. Well, if the rain comes on the mountains, it's got to go down the hill. And it just, this is like the garden spot of this whole land. So that's in there. So we come on down the Jordan River. We've got these different rivers over here on the side. You got the two Ox, right? The Yarmuk and the Jabbok. That's how I remember those two, because they both have OK at the end. And then you have the Arnon and the Zered at the bottom. Remember Sodom and Gomorrah? Sodom and Gomorrah was somewhere in here around the Zered River, if you read that story. Don't know exactly where it was at. Come down here to the Dead Sea. Dead Sea is the lowest spot in the entire world. It is, the shores of the Dead Sea are about 1,300 feet below sea level, and the Dead Sea is about 1,300 feet deep. The ocean has a salinity of 3.5%. The Dead Sea has a salinity of 34%. They call it the Dead Sea because everything around it is dead. When fish come out of the Jordan River and go in there, they're done. They don't make it. When birds fly over it, they die because the evaporation rate of this body of water is so incredibly high. Here's the thing, you think about this, okay? The winds blow over here, they drop all their rain right here, and then they go over this valley, and it's hot and dry, and the only thing that's there that the clouds can suck up moisture from is this big body of water, and they do suck up. I forget what the evaporation rate. I thought I had it written down here somewhere. Maybe not. Oh, here it is. So 800,000 gallons of water flow into this a day, and no water flows out of it. So you think about what the evaporation rate is on that thing. So, and then beneath it is this area called the Araba, which is today, I guess they actually have some agriculture in that area. They have figured out ways to irrigate this. So that's this valley. And then we go up to this place called the, what is it called? The Transjordan Plateau. So you've gone up into this high thing and you come to this kind of like flat spot. Now from here over, there's nothing. There's the Arabian Desert. Nobody goes that way because you can't. It's like thousands of miles of nothing. So there's this road here called the King's Highway, and there were a lot of battles fought over control of that highway. So that was another major trade route. When Moses, he led the Israelites into the Promised Land. He came this way, and Moses died right here at Mount Nebo, right? And if you remember that, then they crossed the Jordan River and walked on dry land right here, right, Jericho, right? So that's where Moses dies, and that's where when the conquest comes, that's where they cross at. So, but this upper part, let me see here if I probably don't have a ton of notes on that. You can see there's some different highlighted: Edom, Moab, Bashan. We think about Moab and Ammon. Do you remember who those two fellows were?
Lot's daughters.
They were Lot's daughter's sons, right? So that's where those people settled at, and that was not part of the Promised Land, right? God did not give that property to those in Israel. So that's kind of, I guess I really don't have a whole lot more. I think the things to remember is that the land is divided up into these regions that go like this. Remember that, that there's 3 roads, right? Because those are important. We read about those a lot in the Bible. This way of the sea, this way of Shur, and the King's Highway. We read about those over and over in the scriptures. Good idea to try to visualize where those things are at when you're reading about them. That's all I got. Thank you, guys. By way of invitation, if there's one among us that has a need, whether you have not been baptized, although I believe everybody in this room has been baptized, just know that the job of us as Christians is to make more Christians, right? So even though everybody in this room is here tonight has been baptized, I'm sure you know some people that haven't been, and we all need to look for ways of opportunities that we can talk to people and try to get them interested in religious things, try to start a conversation with them. And I think the best thing you can do is if you can get somebody to agree to sit down and study the Bible with you. If you can get them to do that, you can make some headway. But other than that, a lot of times it's very hard to convert somebody. We have to have an opportunity to actually have serious conversations about religious things with people. So I would just say that as a way of encouragement. And, we have this, traditionally, we have this invitation spot in a lesson. And, and I guess for tonight I would say is, you know, if somebody needs something, right, you need help with something, if you need prayers, don't keep that to yourself. You know, think about helping somebody. You know, that's a command that Christians, we're supposed to help each other. But also we're supposed to let people know when we need some help, right? It works two ways. So don't keep it to yourself if you need help with something. If there's anybody that has a need, we'd ask you to come forward while we stand and while we sit.